Welcome to the About podcast. Here we explore your financial health in simple and easy to understand ways.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the About podcast. This is Jeremy Scott, one of your hosts here, and joined by
Roy Hucke like cookie.
There you are. There you are. When I first met you, Roy, that's how you introduced yourself. I love that
it's hard for people to say the name. If you look at the spelling, it does not look like that at all.
It does not. It does not.
So being a former teacher, which some of our listeners may not know this, I was a teacher at one point, and the kids didn't know what skipping school playing hooky was.
Oh.
So I actually said hooky like cookie, because if I said hooky like skipping school, they're like, what?
Oh.
Yeah, so hooky like cookie was was the moniker. That's kind of where it came from. And
got it.
And anyways, so I got gifts of cookies a lot. So
there you go. Well, it's kind of funny when you know, as if you've listened to this podcast, you know, I got remarried a year ago or about a year ago, depending on when this episode drops. And when I was introducing my new wife to you and everything, she looked at your name and she's like, "How do you spell that?" And I'm like, "Is this spelled correctly?" Because it was just on the calendar meeting with Roy Hucke. And she's like, Hook, Hawk, who? You know, and I'm like, no, it's Hookie.
That's my life right there.
Yeah. And she looked at me like maybe I was wrong, and I'm like, no, I know the guy pretty well. I can promise you that's how I pronounce this. Yes. So speaking of spouses, do you like that segue?
I do. That's
there you
really
go.
good.
What we're talking about today is talking about money with your partner, family, you know, the important people in your lives, and maybe how to avoid some of the conflicts that can arise when, you know, sometimes financial things go a little astray.
Oh, boy, buckle up.
Oh, my gosh. So this is one of those places where, you know, Roy and I have these conversations all the time that our worlds overlap more than people might suspect. But this is definitely one of those places where our universes overlap because, you know, when I'm working with couples, especially couples about to get married or, you know, whatever, there's things that they expect me, you know, to talk to them about. And there's things that they're a little surprised that I want to talk to them about. And one of those is finances because it can be, it's a big deal.
It is a very, very big deal. And we were talking about this earlier, but, you know, what are the big divorce events?
Yeah. So, I bring this up. So I do premarital counseling when I marry couples. I don't marry couples unless I get a chance to do a couple sessions of premarital counseling with them. Actually, that's not true. I broke that rule once for a couple because they were both in their late 70s. You get a buy. But outside of that, and one of the things that we always talk about in there is like what causes drama, you know, in a marriage or what can ultimately break up a marriage. It usually comes down to one of three things. It's arguments about money, it's arguments about children, or it's arguments about sex. Sometimes it's arguments about faith, depending on where they come from. But if you're in my office, then chances are, you know,
usually they're on the same.
You're on the same page. But those other three tend to be the big ones that people, you know, struggle with coming to some alignment around. Because you do kind of, if you're in a partnered relationship with somebody, you do kind of have to have some alignment around your expectations around those things, especially.
Yes. So it's crazy how I basically have those same conversations. Yeah, I had a young couple in this week, actually, and they're not married yet, but they're engaged and they are making their plans and we want to make sure we're making good decisions. So that's why they came in and talked to someone like me.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked about that specifically this week, how they're not combining their money yet.
Yeah.
But they are different people. I met with them separately and then I met with them together. And so just so I get a better understanding of who they were, right, without their significant other in the room, because you want to see who the real person is. And, you know, one of the things that they're going to be doing is running a budget together,
right?
Even though they're not combining their money yet. On paper, they're going to combine it like it is combined and talk through things and who's paying what or whose paycheck's going towards what. And that's going to be, I think, really healthy for them to have that conversation in advance of them getting married. Mm-hmm. Right. But then it's really funny how, you know, we talk about the stuff that causes divorce and as part of that.
Yeah.
And obviously I don't go into detail on those things like you do, but it's the fact of the matter is I talk about it with them so that they're aware of it and they don't avoid it, that you talk about these things in advance and go through that process so that the money piece is not going to sneak up on you once you're already hitching your wagon to someone.
Right. Well, and what I have noticed is, so we do something similar. I do something similar, and then one of the things I ask them to do is I do talk about like, how is your budget? Like, I mean, do you have a budget that's together? Do you not? In today's modern world, frankly, I think pretty much everybody I've ever married was living together before they got married, because it's just kind of the way of things right now. But oftentimes, even in that situation, they, before they're actually married, they tend to be living kind of more of a roommate kind of lifestyle, where, they've still got, they've got two different checking accounts. They've got, and they're just paying and splitting bills in the same way that you might, again, like with a roommate, which works. But once you get married, things change. Things change in your status and your tax status and all that sort of stuff. People can do what they want. I do encourage people to at least have the conversation about commingling their finances, going to a joint checking account and all that kind of stuff. Because I think there's some benefits to doing that, just, emotionally, and that demonstrates the level of commitment to the relationship.
Our money.
Things need to become ours. That's the whole process. But that's different than what it is. So sometimes I'll have people come in and they'll be like, oh, we already got it worked out. We've been living together for a couple of years. We split bills now. It's no problem. And I'm like, no, because there's other things. There's the paying the bills budget stuff, but there's retirement, there's insurance, there's all these other things. And when you're married, there's a different level of, you have a different legal status with each other when you're married. Mm-hmm. You have different expectations around it. And then you start throwing children into the mix. You're going to want to get the financial piece and understanding out of the way, fairly solid, soon. Right.
Well, and this is a shout out to a future podcast where we'll be talking about financial priorities and how to attack them.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is you have two separate people. They have two separate experiences with money up to that point in their life.
Right.
And how do they prioritize money in different situations?
Yep. And
unless you actually talk through it, you're going to run into a potential argument.
Right.
Right. At a emotional time.
Right.
That creates the problem that we see. Right.
Yeah.
So going through that process of actually talking through priorities of, you have person one, person two, have them both put down their priorities and then see how they align. Mm-hmm. Because it's really interesting. So when you say, okay, this is me individually, but now us together, how do these go together?
Right.
Now do those priorities change?
Right.
And how do we address that? And how do we feel about that? And if your priority of an emergency fund isn't like number one for both people, that's a problem.
It is. It can be challenging.
I see, one person has potential credit card debt, one person doesn't.
Right.
When I was a teacher, it was really interesting because one of the teachers that I knew, she was going to marry a guy, but he had some debt, and she's like, "I'm not marrying you until you pay off your debt."
Oh,
because we're not bringing that debt into our marriage.
Right.
Right. So they were obviously clear about what. Well, she was clear about what.
Right. Well, but I think also, and the reality is that because people are also waiting longer to get married, it's very uncommon to get married in your like early mid-20s. Even though that would have been fairly common.
Where you never had
a while
money,
ago.
Right?
Well, you didn't have anything, right?
You didn't know what
now
it was.
You have people waiting longer. Like, well, your some of your financial habits are fairly entrenched. Yep. By your late 20s, 30s, and if that's when more and more people are getting married, well, then it's even more important to have those conversations. You're also further down your career. You've probably got a few more assets, or you've got a few more debts. And I've seen the same thing where, couples come in and, they're not, in my parlance, equally yoked when it comes to their, financial lives, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but you got to be clear about like what you can deal with. So props to that lady for being incredibly clear about like, okay, like it's like, I like you, I don't want your debt.
Well, he worked really hard, by the way, and got a second job part-time to help pay off that debt.
Yeah.
Because, he's like, this is going to take me, if I just do my current job, it's going to take me X amount of time, which is like, wow, we're not getting married for that long.
Right.
So anyways, it gave him some motivation so that he could get that off of him and then get married. So anyways, having those conversations is really important, being clear about how you feel about money. There's a really good book called The Psychology of Money. Mm-hmm. And that could be a podcast in itself, but understanding your own relationship with money.
Right.
is really important.
Right.
And recently there was a friend of mine who was talking about one of their neighbors gives their kids toys, kind of for good behavior, or they earn it as a reward or something like that. But that can sometimes turn into bribing them with stuff.
Yeah.
And then as that child gets older, their relationship with stuff is a reward situation. So now they might spend money differently because of that experience as a child than someone who maybe gets an allowance and has to save money and then can buy something. Right. So everybody's experience is different. It's not necessarily good or bad per se, because it just depends. And it's not for me to judge anybody how they raise their kids, because I don't have kids and I don't even understand it. So,
it's a whole thing, man.
Right. So, but the point is, you develop a relationship with money, good or bad. There is something that you have, and it just needs to be explored. And sometimes people don't even realize how they actually interact with money.
Right. Well, I think that's step number one is, and we do. So if the idea is like, how do you talk about money and how do that? First, you have to be clear. What are your values around money? Like, I can't share with my potential or future partner my values around it unless and it is about values, right? I mean, it's both your current financial reality, which I want to talk about in a minute, but it's also your values around it are what tends to be kind of the sticky points that if those values are not aligned. And there's kind of the basic, the idea of like, some people are spenders and some people are savers, and those categories are a little too broad, I think, sometimes, but generally speaking, it's not a bad little shorthand. And it's not that a saver and a spender, can't have a successful marriage and relationship, but they have to recognize each other and they have to honor each other's values around it. But first and foremost, you have to know which one of those you are, right? You have to know what are your values around money.
Yep.
The thing about the emergency fund, right? Is that critical because it's, if somebody finds that critical because they need to have it, for whatever reason, and needs to be respected. But if the other person just sees it as like, well, why do we have this big pile of cash that's just sitting there? Why can't we go take a vacation with it?
Why can't we remodel our bathroom?
Right. It's like, we have money. And they're like, well, and so you've got to know what your values are, and you have to respect that when you are disagreeing, or if you find yourself in a slightly different understanding around it than your partner is, you're disagreeing with their values, right? And so you're playing in some really that could be some pretty emotionally heavy space, which is why you got to get clear and you got to work it out. But first and foremost, know what your values are.
Which is also why I have this conversation a lot, because it's always interesting to me when a new client comes in to meet with me, and I'll ask a lot of questions. And it's always funny when I ask a question to a married couple, and then they look at each other. What are you going to say? Right? It's always funny, because even though we're saying this is important, a lot of people haven't done it.
Right.
And that's why we have such a huge problem with money and divorce. But I do force the conversation in my profession. And I do sometimes tell them, like, if this isn't important to you, then everything else doesn't matter. Because your house that you're building, let's say your financial house that you're building, is built on sand, because you don't have the emergency fund.
Right.
And if it's not important to you, that's okay, but I can't help you.
Right.
Because everything else doesn't matter if we don't have that. And now you're pulling out of your retirement assets for things that you should have money set aside for.
Right.
Right. So that is a conversation I do force, which is why I think I run into it so much.
Yeah.
But it's always really interesting to see how people do have that. And also, and I'm sure you see this too, usually one of the people is kind of like the finance person.
Yeah.
And one of them was like, I don't know, he deals with all that, or she deals with all that. It's really funny because it used to be the guy, but it's really not anymore. I have a lot of women that run the books.
Yeah. No, well, because it's kind of, I mean, if it makes sense, just like in the logistics of a household, it's kind of a one person. I mean, there's, one person that, yes, tends to be the one. And that's one of the questions I ask. So I have this little sheet thing. I have couples fill out independently and everything. And one of the questions on there is like, who manages the money or who's better with money? One of the questions on there is like, if you got a surprise $2,000, what would you do with it? Right. And
that's a great question.
It's a great question. Most of the time that tells you everything you need to know about where they are and everything. Because one's like, put it in the bank. And the other one's like, go to Tahiti, and you're like, okay, so like you can both be right, but just know you're going to have to talk about this. And it's funny because in my life, with my late wife, she was the one who managed the day-to-day books. But then in my marriage now, I'm the one that does it. And it was not, I don't know how intentional it was. It's just kind of, that's how it worked.
Evolved.
And I think before, part of it was, and actually we both swapped, because in her previous marriage, she was the one who ran the books. And so she was fine to not have that job anymore because she found it to be, stressful and, because it's not, and all kinds of stuff. So she was fine to give it up. And I hadn't ever really had the opportunity to do it. So I was always kind of wondering about stuff. So we actually swapped the role in this relationship, that the opposite of what we both had in our previous relationship.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. It was.
We should dig into that. I'm joking.
I know. It's like, tell me, how did you make that feel? You all Freudian on me here, Roy? All right. Behind us. But yeah, I think step number one to avoiding conflicts is, and just learning to talk about it is, one, know what your values are. Know what's important to you. What are your goals? And that's where, again, working with a planner helps to help you even articulate those too, because a lot of people maybe haven't been as thoughtful about it too. I mean, sometimes I get a lot of couples that stare at me like, well, I don't actually know what my values around money are, because sometimes they're just embedded. Like it's, whatever you were raised with, like we talked about with the toys, right? Whatever their parents modeled for them, or they're rebelling against their parents. They're behaving differently around it. Their parents are really stingy and now they, whatever. It's not always a conscious people, value, they have values around money. Everybody does. But the level of consciousness they have to what their values are varies dramatically.
Yep. And I'll give you an example too, and this doesn't have to do with money, but it's how I grew up. I grew up in a rural area, so we didn't really go out to eat a lot.
Yeah.
But when we did, let's say that you go to Arby's, it was a treat.
Yeah.
So I experienced that as a child, and today, if I go out to eat at a fast food joint, I have those feelings of like, this is a treat. Right. So instead of making maybe the smart, healthy decision, I'm like, this is a treat. Why would I get something healthy?
Right.
I'm going to get the, whatever. Yeah. So anyways, it's kind of funny, but that's just
double stack with the cheese sauce.
So that's a very simple way of looking at, like, that's actually a bias that I actually have like ingrained in me.
Yeah.
That I know exists. I'm aware of it and I combat it.
But
you never really probably get rid of it because it is something that you kind of just evolved with. And you have to just use that as part of the decision-making process though. So if you have a bias towards money, you have one, Jeremy, I have one.
Yeah.
They're different. And if you have two people who are sitting with different values and experiences with money, you just have to put it on the table and know what exists.
Right.
Sometimes.
Well, in that regard is actually really helpful because it's one of those, it's a small thing, but it's big. Like if you grew up thinking that way, that also means that, that eating out is optional. And eating out is not cheap. I mean, even at fast food anymore, it is not inexpensive. So you're just like, oh, this is a treat, something we do. It's not something we do all the time. So it's not something you're conscious of because if for whatever reason you're a little short that month, you're just not going to go. It's not such a big deal. If you grew up, eating out all the time, and that's just where food comes from.
It's normal.
Right? Then, your mental accounting is going to include a pretty healthy eating out budget.
Yes.
Whereas, your partner's mental accounting isn't because that's just, you go home and have a sandwich.
Man, that's a good spin. Good job.
Right.
That's really good.
So yeah.
But that's exactly the point.
Right.
Even though I'm using it as food, but you're right. Like I'm going to completely view it's optional versus someone who maybe ate out more because they had that ability.
Right.
They're not going to have the same experience with spending that dollar.
Right.
Well, of course we're going to put more money towards eating out. And then the other person's like, what are you talking about?
Right. Right.
We're not going to do that.
I think that's where it gets kind of, because it's on those, like, it's always, I think where it can be a struggle too is on those like fuzzier things that it's not like a bill, right? Like, if you sit down to your family budget, right? I assume a lot of people do what I do, which is first you start with the bills that are coming, you got to pay the power bill.
We call this necessary spending.
Yeah, all the necessary spending. And there's, that's I think a more fairly straightforward conversation to have.
Got to pay the light bill.
You got to pay the
light, water bill.
And they come in big chunks. Like, right, how big a house are we going to buy? How much mortgage can we have? Are we going to buy a new car? How much car payment can we afford? Right? Like those kind of conversations kind of naturally emerge. On the non, the discretionary end of things is, where, I think the differences in values and the differences in around expectations can crop up more, depending on, what that is. And, whether that's eating out or vacations or, for a lot of people that will see things like savings as discretionary. Some savings I don't think is, but, I'm like, so how much do you prioritize that? Because if you're putting money away and you're saving it, that's great, but that usually means you're not doing something over here.
Yeah. It's always interesting talking to people too about that because, I'm a financial planner.
Yeah.
I got tools.
You do?
The numbers don't lie. So when I actually talk to someone about their actual necessary spending and they give me the number that they got to pay every month, right? And they give me their income every month and I take into consideration their tax situation for income taxes. And I could say to them, well, you guys have a free cash flow of $2,000 a month. Where's that money going? And then they look at each other. They're like, well, we're not doing a really good job with that, whatever it is, right? But you're like, well, you're telling me you have these things that you want to do. I can tell you right now, you guys have $2,000 a month free cash flow beyond what you actually need to pay the bills.
Right.
How are you allocating that? We need to step back and take a look at that. And I'm like, my job's not to tell you what's important, but if you're telling me you want to do this, you can't find the money to do this, but the money's there. I can see that it's there. And you have to say, is it really a priority or is some of the other things a higher priority?
Right. It's
your choice, but I can really shed light on that and help them and look at themselves in the mirror a little bit in a fun way. It's not a shaming way.
No.
But it's a way that, hey, we need to decide, is this important to us or not?
Right.
Because maybe it's not.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
But be just real with yourselves.
But if it is and it's something you want to do, then all right. So like I said, I've had a lot of these conversations, recently, just because I'm building a new life with a new wife and, kids and all that kind of stuff. And so, so trying to really understand and that, my wife now is also a pastor, so she's a little bit more in tune, which is nice. And so we can talk about things in terms of values and everything. It's not clear. And I wouldn't say we were 100% aligned either, but I respect the fact where she's coming from and she respects the fact where I'm coming from. And so we're making it work for sure. And it's not been a major source of stress for us, which has been nice. Where was I going with this?
I don't know, but I will tell you, I have seen this in action.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, you guys do have different viewpoints around some of the decisions that we were going to make.
Yeah.
But when you actually when we actually stripped away the onion layers and said, hey, here's what you guys are trying to solve.
Right. Yes,
here's the options before you. You guys actually landed on the same spot.
We did. Well, we did. Well, okay, that's where I was going with it. Is like this idea is like the next thing after being clear about, your own values and being able to share those and articulate those and having some consciousness of what that is. Also being willing to have some transparency around your financial life. And again, as you get older in life and your financial situation gets more complicated, there's more that you have to be transparent about. And there's that point at which, where you have to decide within a relationship that maybe is progressing a long way, like at what point do you become more transparent about what your financial situation is? I've only ever had it once, but I have had people, I've had one couple in my office doing premarital counseling that had gotten within a couple of months of the wedding without actually sharing with each other their actual financial situation. And it came out in the conversation that one of them was not in the position that they thought they were in. And we worked through it, and it took a little extra work, and they had to go and do some work on it and, actually show each other, but there is come a point where you do have to kind of open yourself up and offer some transparency around what your actual financial situation is.
Well, and I actually really I say it this way on purpose, but I tell people like you have to be willing to get financially naked in front of your partner.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you're not willing, and I say it like that because it's like that is vulnerable.
Yeah. When we did that with you, the first time Emily and I sat down to do that with you, I apparently hadn't quite fully explained what it is that we were doing. And when we left, she's like, "Wow, that was a lot." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a financial pantsing, but you got to do it."
But by doing that though, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable situation.
Right.
You're actually being real with yourself. And for our listeners, if you're not willing to get financially naked in front of your partner, then you need to really reevaluate. Why? Is there a reason? Is there something you're doing now that you need to change your behavior? Or you really got to think through this, because this is a really, really important piece of the equation.
Yes.
And for me as a financial planner, I require it for
right.
to work with me, because I got to know.
You got to know what's going on.
I got to know, because I can't give you good advice if I don't know.
Yeah, there's some gremlin in the thing. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
So I kind of walk people through that so that they've never done it before. They're doing it for the first time. And that's why I kind of always get that, I ask a question, they look at each other. I always kind of chuckle, because I'm just like, okay, I'm getting to the root here when they look at each other like, what are you going to say here? I'm not sure.
Well, and I do. I mean, and I remember when it became clear to me, and I think it was coming clear to Emily that, that this thing that we were doing together was going to become more of a thing and all of that. I mean, there was this moment where I'm just like, all right, I guess I need to change. I need to share my spreadsheet with you. And she's like, what? I'm like, oh, I have my little my budget spreadsheet. Because if we're going to start having conversations about things like where are we going to live, if that's where this is heading, then, there's no reason, to not, like, I need to, so I'm like, here's my spread. Here are my current bills. Here's, this, that, and the other stuff. And then she went and made hers and made it a second tab on the Google sheet on mine. And then we was like, okay, let's start talking about how these get put together and, because that's going to dictate, where we're going to be and how this thing is going to work. But remember that moment. We're just like, I think it's time to share the spreadsheet.
It's really
with you.
Interesting, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
There's the first kiss, and then there's the
and it
first,
was well after the first kiss.
Well, of course it is.
It was just like,
you have first, and that's one of those firsts.
Yeah, we're like, we're getting serious now. I gotta show you my checkbook.
Yes.
But just to know what we're dealing with. And my financial situation was different than her financial situation. Not good, not bad, or anything like that. But it was just like, all right, how are we going to put these together? And then how are we going to move forward? What are we going to move forward on? And what are our goals? And how are we going to get there? And everything, because I had people have different ways of getting there. I was like, I had a couple in my office, like, when they want to do a vacation or whatever, like, I think it was, him, but I think like his standard thing was like, well, we go on vacation, we just put it all on a credit card and then we spend the next 6 months paying it off. And her response was like, no, we save the money for 6 months before we go. Right. So we don't have to put it on a credit card. And neither one of them could really, was struggling to hear why the other person thought the way that they did about it, But that's a real practical thing that's going to keep coming up because you're going to keep wanting to go on vacations. Yep. So how are you going to pay for those?
Yep.
I've got my biases on which I think is the right way to do it. But you need to have some alignment around that.
You do. And one of the areas that people get a lot of debt is from those. We're doing this, and hey, we're never going to be back here, and let's just put it on the credit card.
Right.
We'll pay it off, and then it just kind of snowballs. So it is important, I think, to have a budget when you do those things so that doesn't happen, because you want to have some of that, of course, but you should also be able to pay it off.
Yeah, what I have found is it kind of steals my joy for out of something if we're out somewhere and we're putting on a credit card, because then all of a sudden things like, oh man, we're going to have to pay that off. Yep. I'm definitely on the save at least most of it, ahead of time kind of road. Tip my hat. I'm sitting here co-hosting a financial planning podcast, so obviously my biases are probably fairly obvious.
You're getting some good biases.
Yeah.
One of the things I did also want to touch on with this, because it's not just about your partner, but it's about family.
Yeah.
So one of the things I just want to put into the ether is that when you are helping family financially, I really recommend people just look at it as a gift.
Oh.
I really do, because if you get into a financial transaction with a family member and it doesn't go well, it can really create problems.
It can.
So if somebody's in a situation and you can help them, I would truly, obviously there's different sizes, of course, and you have to be prudent with these decisions. But,
sure.
If it's just a one-off situation and need a little bit of help and assistance, and you can do a one-off gift, then just consider it a gift.
Yeah.
If it's a family member that's the immediate, then I do have situations where parents will help children because you have the money. If they have extra money, do you want to help your child today or when you die?
Right.
So they'll help them today, but they just take it into consideration with their estate plan. So if I gave you got 3 kids, A, B, and C, and you gave child A different than B, different than C to help them assistance, you just make sure you document that in the estate plan. It can be subtracted off of their share of the estate plan. Right. So that everyone's made whole and no child is treated financially better than the other.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I like that advice. I like the idea of just like, if you're going to help family, especially if it's family, if you're going to help family, I like that idea of just kind of treat it as a gift, and in big and small ways. I mean, my son's been out on his own for a few months now. He ran into one situation, he's only had 1 month where he got to the end of the month. And he's like, Dad, I don't have my rent. And I'm like, okay. And he wasn't off by much, and hadn't asked for really anything. Honestly, I'm getting off pretty cheap with this one as far as getting him out of the house. So I'm like, yeah, honey, we can help you out. And I'm like, it's a gift this time. It's fine. But that whole financial transparency thing is, I am still on his checking account, so I can still go in there and look. And I said, if I go look at your checking account balance, what am I going to see? And he's like, I know. And I'm like, okay, basically, how much DoorDash am I going to see in there? Back to the Facebook thing. He's like, yeah, and he's like, yeah, and I'm like, I'm sorry, and he's like, no, it's fine, that's why. I mean, I just, I'm happy to do it.
Well, it's not fine. You're willing to help them. It's fine, but let's recognize the pattern of behavior that puts you where you're at, right?
Exactly. It's like, but the cost of this isn't you don't have to pay me back. I mean, it's not like that.
Gift.
It's a gift, but it's a gift that comes with a little bit of a dad moment.
With a stern look,
a bit of a look and a bit of like, and because things happen,
it do,
right?
He's probably gonna learn more from that by having to come to you and say, Dad, I'm short.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah, he's learning so much.
He'll never want to do that again.
No. So, or if he does, he knows he can come and he knows that the conversation that's going to happen about it. And like, okay. And that,
but you've also taught him good principles.
But it's also that back to the transparency, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're going to be honest with me about, where you're at and what's going on. And we're going to say, okay, like, how are we going to avoid this in the future? Okay. Like, great. There is grace. I'm kind of in that business. But if he wasn't willing to be transparent with me,
not as much grace.
Then maybe not as much grace, right? And I think that's the other piece too, is have some honesty, right? And that's on all of those things, like all of those big things that tend to be, that cause problems in life is where what really causes the problems there is a lack of honesty or lack of transparency about what values you're bringing to this relationship. And I got to tell you, the conversation with new couples about the finances, like that is that one and the one about sex, because we have the same conversation about that we all have our own values around sex that we bring into this stuff. We all have our own expectations about what we bring in it. And if there is an alignment there's an opportunity for some friction. Like those two are kind of, those are always the most fun conversations.
Well, and both of those come down to communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're not willing to be honest, let's just say that if you're literally not willing to be honest or for some reason, you're really lying to yourself,
right?
Because there's something that's underlying that you need to address to be able to create a healthy situation around the money or the sexual situation that you're talking about. And that is a very, very alarming situation. If I see that, it's very alarming.
Right. Well, because it all comes down to trust. Like if you're entering a partnered relationship with somebody, then hopefully you're doing it because this is a person that I trust. And I want to build a life together with, well, then you probably need to trust them. And with all of your, most intimate pieces, right? But financial, there's intimacy in finances, right? There's, that it feels that way. Again, you talk about getting it financially naked, like that there is a piece there. And I mean, and I've had couples in my office, where, the struggle, they've been married for 10, 15, 20 years or whatever it is. I've had those couples in my office too, who are struggling because there was basically what accounts to financial infidelity, right? Like somebody was hiding something, they were hiding debt from their partner, or somebody was hiding, an asset from their partner, or whatever. And it doesn't feel good to feel like somebody's hiding something from you. So again, transparency and honesty, know what your values are, be transparent about them. Be transparent about your reality.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. So if hopefully if you're thinking about, currently getting married, thinking about it, whatever the situation is, just talk to Roy or me.
Probably both of us.
Yeah, talk to both of us. So,
We'll pull it out of you.
There you go. All right. So talking money with our partners and or family.
That's right.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Avoid, the communication is how you avoid.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to have a big dust up.
No.
Just communicate.
Yeah. This is one of those things where it can get big and all that kind of stuff, but really the solution of it is actually fairly.
It's very straightforward.
Very straightforward. Honesty and transparency, and and respecting each other. And that's the other piece of it too, I would say, is if you might uncover that you and your partner have different values around money, that's not a disqualifier for having, entering into a relationship with somebody, in my opinion, but it will require that each person respect the fact that the other person does have some different values around it. There's some compromises that are going to need to happen as far as, how things go, and all of that. And that just, again, comes back to that kind of respect, knowledge, kind of piece where you're just like, okay, like I'm going to understand that your values might be different, but that doesn't mean that they're invalid.
Exactly.
Right? Because you come back a different way. You come to your values around like eating out and all that kind of stuff. Honestly, from your history and background, somebody else might come at it from a very different place.
Yep.
And they come by it honestly. And so you guys got to respect each other in that regard, because you're going to have that stuff all throughout.
And like you and Emily experienced, when you actually looked at what it was you were trying to accomplish,
right?
You both landed on the same decision.
We did.
So that's the piece of it, is like, hey, when it's the most important things are the most important things, and you're going to probably agree on those.
Right.
And if you don't, you really need to probably, again, go through the process of laying it all on the table,
right,
making sure that you understand their point of view.
Right.
If something's not clicking. But 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to say, well, yeah, that makes the most sense for our family.
Right.
Let's do that.
Right. And this is where having a third party in the conversation
it so is too.
Is you just kind of need it sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean, I imagine I've had therapist friends in my life, and they will tell you, like, when people show up and they this is what they end up talking about, in marriage counseling situations. Big fan of marriage counseling. If you feel like maybe you need to go, then you probably need to go. But I think that's good, working with a financial planner that really knows their stuff and is really invested in helping you guys succeed and make a plan and help you succeed. You can't do that without some transparency and honesty around what's going on. When you're or if you're a person of faith, with your pastor or whatever. Helping, letting them kind of help you, mediate some of these conversations, because sometimes just having that third person in the room is just helpful, just to kind of help mediate a little bit.
I will tell you, the amount of times that people will come in, bring something up, talk through it, and answer it before I even say anything.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And they literally just need to have like me looking at them to
Right.
know, like, I know what you're going to say already. Mm-hmm. We're going to do this. Oh, that's a great decision.
Yeah.
It's really funny. But hey, good on people for being willing and able to communicate. And if you're struggling in your own marriage with finances, really consider, getting financially naked and vulnerable about why.
Right.
And work through that, because, money is not a reason to lose a relationship.
Yeah. Well, shout out to our What is a Financial Advisor episode. This is part of the reason that having a planner, and help you come up with a plan, is important. And I think even doing it, I'm props to that couple you mentioned that is doing it early in the relationship, because sometimes when you're early in a relationship, you might think, well, we don't have any finances to plan for anyway. I'm like, no, this is the time to build the plan and the infrastructure, as you grow and progress. Yep. Because you will eventually. I mean, hopefully over time, as you progress in your career and all that kind of stuff, you will have financial assets that accumulate around you. The more that you're on the same page about what that looks like, how you want it to look like, what your goals are, the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely. And shout out to our future episode we're going to be doing about emergency funds.
Yes.
And the why and the how. And I think that'll really help people as well when they're wanting to look at emergency funds and why do we need to do this. And it'll be a good one.
That'll be good. All right. Well, thank you, Roy. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We make this for you. So whether you're watching or listening on your podcast feed, watching on YouTube, however you're doing it, that's great. As always, like, subscribe, share. Got a couple in your life that's maybe newly forming, maybe send them this episode and let them learn alongside with us. And if you have any thoughts or questions for future episodes, drop us a line and let us know. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed it. Always do.
Always do.
CWA is a Securities and Exchange Registered Investment Advisor. No content contained herein should be construed as an offer for investment advice or an offer for the purchase or sale of any security, insurance, or other investment product. Investments involve the risk of low loss, including loss of principal. Please consult with a qualified financial, tax, or legal professional before implementing any strategy presented here. Data presented here are obtained from believed reliable sources but cannot be guaranteed as to completeness or accuracy.